Welcome to the Environmental Crimes Financial Toolkit podcast, where we explore the fastest growing threats at the intersection of environmental destruction and financial crime. Environmental crimes, illegal logging, wildlife trafficking, illegal mining, and other offences generate hundreds of billions of dollars annually. These aren't just conservation issues. They're sophisticated financial crime operations involving money laundering, corruption, and transnational organised crime networks that move illicit proceeds through the global financial system. This podcast series brings together the people on the front lines of this fight: financial crime experts, environmental investigators, law enforcement officials, regulators, and banking practitioners. Together, we'll examine how environmental crimes actually work as financial operations, what red flags financial institutions should watch out for, and how better collaboration between sectors can disrupt these networks. Whether you're a compliance professional trying to understand environmental crime risks, a regulator developing policy, or simply interested in how financial systems enable and can help stop environmental destruction, this series will give you practical insights and real-world perspectives. I'm Olivia Dakeen, and this is the Environmental Crimes Financial Toolkit podcast.
Today we'll be talking about the illegal wildlife trade, which is the focus of a research report by Themis and WWF that was released earlier this year. It's called Dissecting the Environmental Financial Crime Nexus, a spotlight on the illegal wildlife trade. And it's freely available to access through the Environmental Crimes Financial Toolkit on the Themis website. Joining me today is Ben Brock, a wildlife crime analyst at Traffic. And if you haven't heard of Traffic, it's an NGO that monitors the global trade in animals and plants. So Ben is a real expert on this subject. And Ben and I met when he helped contribute a case study to Themis and WWF's research report on the illegal wildlife trade. And it's that case study that we're going to talk about today in a bit more detail. So before we start, a brief introduction to Ben, who has been working at Traffic for the past 6 years, and in that time has worked on a range of what sound like really fascinating projects across Africa, Asia, Europe and North America, which include interviewing convicted wildlife crime offenders in Namibian prisons, capacity building with law enforcement agencies, and also working with financial institutions to manage their anti-money laundering and sustainable supply chain risks. And before that, Ben spent over 15 years working with the UK's National Crime Agency, disrupting transnational organised crime, predominantly in the areas of drug, weapon and people trafficking. And we might not have time to go into it too much today because we are trying to keep these episodes sort of quite bite-sized. But I think that's a really important point to highlight up front because it does illustrate the crossover and the convergence between the illegal wildlife trade and other crimes like drugs trafficking. And that's something that a lot of my own research is really focused on. And that's definitely the main thrust of our research report with WWF. So hello, Ben. Nice to have you on today. And just for anyone who hasn't read the research report, or perhaps those of you who can't remember every single page of it, Ben contributed the case study on cheetah trafficking, which I think is a really, really interesting topic because I think a lot of people, when they think about the illegal wildlife trade, they think about ivory, they maybe think about pangolin scales, but they're probably a bit less aware of the trade in these large and live animals for the purposes of keeping them as pets, for example, and that is a very common practice. So Ben, maybe we just start off with the basics by looking at the demand side of this. Very simply, why is it that people want to keep cheetahs as pets?
Hello, Olivia, and thank you very much for having me here today. The trade in cheetahs is one that we see that's quite different from many of the other trades we look at. It primarily seems to be for fueling the desire for cheetahs as a status symbol for people that want to try and demonstrate an extravagant or luxury lifestyle on their social media accounts. And so this makes it very, very different that most of our illegal trades, like all types of illegal trade, are fundamentally hidden. But because the end recipients of these animals want to show them off, and if you do go on Instagram, it's been widely reported in a variety of different media sources. We see these pictures of cheetahs in the front of speedboats, cheetahs on or around luxury cars, and it becomes this sort of, I think people are seeking to demonstrate the rarity, to demonstrate maybe their wealth, power, influence, and it has a regional history that cheetahs have got a historic significance in the Gulf states where they were used as royal hunting animals. I also understand the desire for having a pet cheetah. They're gorgeous. They're lovely animals. They're elegant. Their coat is amazing. And if you're a cat person, I don't think there's any way that you can't be attracted to them. The real downside that we think that many people don't understand is that for each cheetah that arrives in Gulf states to be posted on Instagram or another social media platform, 2 out of 3 of the cheetah cubs that were probably collected from the wild will have died to get there. And the cheetahs that do get to the Gulf states, research indicates that they tend not to live more than a couple of years because they aren't kept in appropriate conditions, they can't have their fundamental needs met, and they can't necessarily access the veterinary care that they need. And so this is the really dark side of this trade. And I know maybe when I first encountered it, you see very glamorous people with these beautiful animals, and the animal looks it's got a healthy coat, and it all looks good. So I can see why people who are unfamiliar with it are drawn to the trade. But it's one of unfortunately these social media illusions where the truth and the reality is far, far darker, and the harm to this very endangered animal is quite severe.
It makes me so sad to hear about, the experience of those wild animals in captivity, but the sort of the 2 and 3 cheetah cubs dying en route, I think is that my sister's got cats, and I love them more than I love most people in this world. So it's a real dagger to my heart, and I think we could go down a real wormhole about all the awful things that social media is driving, but let's not, because that could be a 2-hour diatribe from my end. But as well as that sort of basic aspect of demand, what are some of the other drivers of this trade?
Well, the trade we see in cheetahs, unlike other big cats, so there is significant and large trades in pretty much all big cats, from tigers, lions, through all types of big cats, where many are being used in traditional medicine various places around the world, or as luxury goods. People do like to have big cat skins. Claws can be good luck charms. And so generally with the big cat trade, there is demand for private zoos and things like that. So there is some big cat legal trade, but the majority that we see is unfortunately body parts. But with cheetahs, we do see some body parts, but unlike the trade in other big cats, where we see a lot of parts being trafficked, the cheetah trade does seem to be more for live animals, for high status exotic pets. And we see that movement from the live cheetahs taken from the wild in East Africa over to the Arabian Peninsula. The desire for exotic pets creates the pull factor, the demand, the market, if you like. But the other one that we see, which is a frequent problem for conservation worldwide, is the human-wildlife conflict. And as WWF has reported widely, as we see human populations expand, coming further and further into cheetah habitats, those habitats are fragmented and degraded, and the cheetahs are no longer able to undertake their hunting methodologies that they would have done. And this has forced cheetahs into closer proximity with humans and critically their livestock, which can lead to conflict. Sometimes we believe that the cheetahs are mistakenly attributed for kills around livestock. But when we're looking at the Horn of Africa, we see people who are really struggling at a very fundamental level, severe poverty, severe drought. And so you have these farmers who their livestock is absolutely critical to their survival and their family's survival. And when they lose these animals, it's a huge threat to their ability to feed themselves and their children. And when seen like this, it's very understandable that people want to take action against it. And so the farmers may take action to go and kill the cheetahs. And if they can track the adult cheetah back to the family, then the mother cheetah can be killed in a retaliatory attack, and then her orphaned cubs then become a target for trafficking, because it is known that they are a species that has value. And it's something that I really don't want to push the criticism onto farmers who are struggling at the very, very edge of poverty for this. I think that the demand side, which creates this demand, which means that there are people who are seeking to source wild cheetah cubs, who do then advertise that they are willing to pay what would be very significant amounts of money for a rural livestock herder to then access these cubs. And as we would see along a lot of trade chains where there is a huge imbalance of power, a rural farmer may receive around about $400 for a cheetah cub, but the same cheetah cub may be sold for $15,000 at the end market. So these rural farmers are not the ones who are benefiting from the trade. It's the middlemen, the brokers, who are able to access the biggest profit margin.
I think it's a really good point as well about those sort of live creatures, and that you kind of made initially about, because they look well looked after, that people can sort of think that they're actually not necessarily doing a service to these animals, but that they are looking after them properly. And we've seen it in we talk about in the research report around sort of plant trafficking as well, that there's sometimes collectors who are sort of very keen on conservation, and they kind of mistakenly think that taking these sort of endangered plants from the wild is actually doing them a service and protecting them, but taking something out of its habitat is really really good for it. So what sort of scale are we talking about here, and you've mentioned some of those kind of regional trends and jurisdictions, but what are some of the specifics? We often talk about source and transit and destination countries when we're talking about illicit trade. So can you break some of those down for us as well?
Yes, certainly. And with cheetahs going into the live cheetah trade, they are a very fragmented population. And so there is a cheetah population around Namibia, but we don't perceive that those are as threatened by the trade in exotic pets as the Eastern Africa animals are. What we've traditionally seen from the reports that we do get is animals from Ethiopia and Somalia transiting via the Horn of Africa and Yemen. These are places where the borders can be relatively porous. There's a wide variety of complex and serious challenges that are restricting the rule of law in the region, and so we have levels of control on the borders that may not be as effective as we would like them to be. We estimate that around 300 cheetahs are smuggled out of the Horn of Africa each year, and unfortunately we have a mortality rate of about 2/3, so only 100 at best will be probably arriving in the target markets. The target markets are assessed to be Saudi Arabia, Kuwait, Bahrain, UAE, Oman, and Qatar. As I say, we have an unusual window into the reliability of that we can actually profile the social media accounts where these animals are appearing. And like a lot of animal data, it's very hard to put this into context. So to provide just a couple of numbers, IUCN estimates that there are 6,500 mature cheetahs remaining in the wild, and that population has fallen by 30% in the last 15 years. And so we are seeing, with 300 moving out each year, that's far above the wild cheetah's ability to procreate and maintain their species. We also estimate that in the target countries where they are being kept as exotic pets, there is estimated to be about 1,000 cheetahs. And while we may think well, maybe that's a population reservoir that could protect the species in the future. We don't see these animals living very long. We don't see them being kept in appropriate conditions. And so they are very unlikely to be able to contribute back to the survival of the species in the long term. And again, with the illegal wildlife trade, sometimes the enforcement of it can be hard because it's not immediately clear, is the trade legal or is the trade illegal? And there are very complex rules whereby sometimes something can be and something can't. But cheetahs are an Appendix 1 species, where this means that all international commercial trade is effectively banned. There is one breeding facility in South Africa. However, significant questions have been raised about the number of cheetahs that are allegedly produced and the normal production rates of cheetahs in captivity, as they're not a species that reproduces very easily. So some really serious questions around it. And hopefully for your listeners, something to quite easily get a hold of is, if you're seeing cheetahs in trade, you really shouldn't be seeing it. There's almost certainly a problem with that transaction, and that will really benefit from increased scrutiny.
So I know that traffickers all over the world use some very interesting concealment techniques, both in terms of kind of the physical goods, but also the financial flows that either allow or enable them or sort of are generated from them. Have you seen any key techniques? As you're saying, any trade in cheetahs is very, very probably illegal. So have you seen any key techniques of people trying to hide this trade or disguise the transactions that are related to it?
Yes, the ingenuity of criminals is something that has fascinated me throughout my career. The techniques that I have seen drug traffickers use to manage to get their commodity across jurisdictions is amazing. And similarly, the money laundering techniques range from the incredibly inventive to the hugely sophisticated. And we also see where the volumes of money available to the illegal drugs trade means that they can get into the legitimate financial structures in ways that enables them to circumvent many of the controls. When I came away from the National Crime Agency, where I'd been focusing on traditional transnational crime, I wanted to come and work in conservation because of a personal interest, and I felt it was a very important area to work in. But one of the biggest surprises when I came into it was to see that the illegal wildlife trade had all of the hallmarks of the transnational organized crime that I was used to dealing with in these other areas. I would say there is one subtle difference, and that is the illegal, I'm familiar with it, it's a figure that may be slightly outdated, but the illegal heroin trade kills one person approximately every 7 hours in the UK. My data may be a little bit out, but it gives you a marker. We don't see that in the illegal wildlife trade. There's always more crime than there is law enforcement capability to respond to it. And because of the previous and maybe earlier perceptions of the limited harm that it did, I think that harm perception is changing as people understand the impact of biodiversity loss and climate degradation. But it hasn't received the same level of law enforcement attention that the more traditional crime types have, like people trafficking. And therefore, the wildlife traffickers have not had to develop the same level of sophistication that you would see around weapon traffickers, drug traffickers, or people traffickers. And this creates, I think, a unique opportunity that through forums like this, we are able to try and educate your listeners. These complex, sophisticated detection networks that are set out to look for money laundering, and to be able to provide this information to transaction monitoring units, anti-money laundering units, and enable them to bring their expertise to this trade. And one of the great opportunities is, I think that it will be slightly easier to respond to, because we don't necessarily see the same effort of people hiding and disguising their transactions that we do in these other areas. The counterpoint to that is that because this is a crime that receives little law enforcement prioritization globally, we don't have the same level of suspicious transaction reports or suspicious activity reports to be able to analyze, to pull these pictures together. And while we certainly do get arrests and successful court cases that allows us to build a criminal profile, we don't have them at the same volumes that we do for the other areas. So there is a lot unknown. But one of the great opportunities that we do have, and I would refer people to FinCEN's advisory looking at the illegal wildlife trade, is you will often see transactions that do refer to animals. They may not say, transaction for 3 cheetahs, but you may see some details for animals, for cats. And also as comes up in the FinCEN advisory, their analysis of suspicious transaction reports, they found mentioning private zoos, animal importers, breeders, pet stores, exotics parks, things where there may be some justifiable reason for these trades. I appreciate that means that these transactions run the risk of being false positives for the legitimate trade, not in cheetahs, but just legitimate animal trade. But when we have such a specific regional business, it does allow filtering by the countries that I have mentioned before, that we are specifically looking at East Africa and the Gulf states.
Yeah, and to my mind, I think it's definitely worth the risk of having a couple of false positives to not let sort of actual cases kind of fall through the net. And that's something that we always try to really encourage is the filing of suspicious transaction reports, because I know that a lot of financial institutions, they don't really hear much back on it, and they sort of feel like they're putting this information kind of out into a void, and therefore they're not sure if what they're giving out there is really useful, but it really, really is. And I'd really encourage everyone to kind of carry on doing that, because that is the best way of raising kind of this the level of knowledge from data. So talking about kind of convergence a bit more, which we mentioned at the start, and as you talked about in relation to there being a great similarity between wildlife trafficking and sort of drugs trafficking, and I think as you were talking about, these low penalties mean that actually a lot of polycriminals kind of diversify their portfolios, really, so to speak, into trafficking of all sort of different types of product, and that includes wildlife. And there's very little downside to people using, the same networks and kind of infrastructure as they do for trafficking things like drugs for wildlife, because they're less likely to get caught, and if they do get caught, they're less likely to get sort of a conviction or really any kind of prosecution as well. So there's also that kind of convergence with corruption, isn't there, of people sort of bribing officials. So if we talk about that convergence, have you seen cheetah trafficking converging either, I guess, with other financial crimes or trafficking crimes, or actually still sticking with the illegal wildlife trade in other species?
Yes, absolutely. I would say and it's not just myself, UNODC, Interpol, they all have highlighted the convergence of corruption and the illegal wildlife trade. And I think it has a unique niche that, because the penalties for illegal wildlife trade in the majority of countries aren't so severe, and the money that can be made is very good money, it runs the risk of being a high benefit, low risk area to become involved in corruption-wise. But also, unlike many illegal trades, the fraudulently obtained or materials obtained or paperwork obtained through corruption can make an illegal trade seem entirely legitimate. And so we see huge problems across the illegal wildlife trade with falsely acquired or corruptly acquired paperwork being used to seemingly legitimize illegal trade. One example of this was when we saw 16 supposedly captive bred cheetahs exported from Bahrain and the UAE to Armenia. It's quite a while ago. They were shipped between 2009 and 2015, but Bahrain actually has no known cheetah breeding facilities. So any paperwork that is going to support this is almost inevitably going to be fraudulent or corrupt.
Yeah, and I know Traffic also did a really good report, which I read when I was writing this wildlife trade report on the corruption in the biomedical industry, in the supply chain for sort of primates that were being supplied for medical research, which we reference, and which I think is really interesting report as well, if people want to go and read that. So I think a lot of people listening, they might be thinking this is really interesting. It's really sad, it's really depressing, but maybe it's not that relevant to them personally, or maybe not that relevant to their jobs. I hope that we can persuade people that it really is. So how would you say that the exotic pet trade is relevant to financial institutions, and why should they care? And I know that's a really leading question, but let's do it anyway.
So, well, firstly, it is just a risk around money laundering, and it is probably a risk that hasn't been at the forefront of people's minds for the last 20 years. But we did see FATF in 2019 or 2020 produce their paper on the illegal wildlife trade, and we saw a real pickup in requests for training and inquiries from financial institutions to better understand what the illegal wildlife trade may look like, so that they can understand what their exposure to the money laundering may be. And linked to what we were discussing earlier, the frequency that corruption is seen around the illegal wildlife trade, I think this exacerbates the risk to financial institutions that not only are they at risk of handling the proceeds of crime, they are at risk of facilitating serious corruption. And I believe that even if someone is utterly indifferent to the natural world, those risks are something that anti-money laundering units and financial institutions do face a threat from. Throughout my time with Traffic, building upon my work, having formerly worked in the UK FIU, I actually think that conservationists and the financial sector can actually do a surprising amount to cooperate. And in the margins of the training I've done and the presentations I've given, I will often have a couple of people approach me at the end of whatever event it is and say they have a personal passion and they would love to do more. And it's fantastic to reach these people, because by capturing that real enthusiasm, they fill a role that conservation never can. Conservationists will never be able to look at suspicious transaction reports. They have no role understanding or looking for illicit finance. But by combining these very two different industries, we can have a real impact. And so to all the people who are out there at a desk that may seem a long, long way from the natural world, but who would like to do more, I would really encourage you to look at the different typologies, understand the illegal wildlife trades that may be in the geographies that you focus on, and to understand that you have an incredible power to disrupt this illegal wildlife trade, which does have a huge impact to protect animals and species. And it's a uniquely powerful position and has a tremendous value. So we'd really encourage anyone who is interested to become involved.
Yeah, me too. So I think sadly it's probably time to wrap up, but maybe we can just squeeze in one last question, which I think that was quite a rousing kind of call to action. I think it's always useful to end on a semi-positive note, as positive as you can be when you're talking about this sort of activity. But what are some of the ways that you see of tackling the trade? Maybe also dampen that positivity with a sprinkling of realism or pessimism, maybe about what some of the challenges are. But I think that's also good to talk about, because without knowing what the challenges are, we can't tackle them, can we?
No, and thank you for that. One part that I believe can be very impactful is simply this education, so that when people see someone posting pictures of a cheetah or any exotic animal on social media, please don't be impressed. Please do not send them adoration and positive engagement. Do question the role that has in keeping that species alive. If you love that species, unless you have proper qualifications in the right environment, you probably shouldn't be handling it. And so that goes from almost any of the incredible species that we have, from dolphins to tigers to cheetah cubs. If someone is handling it and they're not a vet, then you really should ask questions as to, is this in any way beneficial for the animal, or is this animal just going to be abused for online impact and then will probably suffer an early death? That's pretty dark. I will acknowledge that, but that's one of my things from having looked at a lot of profiles online that I would love people to carry away. An area where people can really focus on this trade and disrupt the trade is that we see the key people in many parts of the illegal wildlife trade, but particularly the illegal cheetah trade, is the role of middlemen and brokers. And arrest and seizure and prosecution data shows that many of the people who act as middlemen, moving the cheetahs from the source country to the destination markets, they frequently need to be multilingual. They frequently need to have contacts, many of whom may have a corruption element, in order to facilitate the movement of these species across borders. They're unlikely to have just started doing this. And they often have long careers, and they are involved in multiple different types of species. And so we've seen that people involved in the cheetah trade are also involved in tiger cubs, meerkats, all different types of animals, because they are, like many business people, diversifying across that area. And so for the anti-money laundering community, looking for these people who may hold the role of a middleman or broker is a key way to disrupt this trade, because if they get taken out, it removes the demand that drives the collection of the cheetahs in their home ranges and disrupts the ability of people to access them to put on social media. And by disrupting the visibility of them on social media, that then reduces the perception that it is acceptable or that it is okay. And so these middlemen are a key point. And in targeting these middlemen, some of the red flag indicators that your listeners may be interested in is prior convictions around the illegal wildlife trade. They can be very low level. They don't necessarily carry a serious jail time, but any type of prior conviction, administrative fines around wildlife is a red flag. Multi-species traders involve themselves, and so you may see multiple payments, many with either different types of animal references. Again, that's a useful red flag. The role of corruption, payments going to or from government officials, port authorities, anything. I'm sure your listeners will know what to look for in bribery. A classic one, I know this is money laundering 101, but round sum payments. They still exist. We still see them. They still happen. It's another good indicator. And as I was saying, the confluence of multiple exotic pet species leads to many numerous or varied animal-related words or descriptions in payment mechanisms associated with these people.
So thank you so much, Ben. It's been such a pleasure talking to you again today, and it always is a pleasure. And I think there are lots of resources on the Traffic website, which will be very useful for people. Lots of interesting reports. There's one on the cheetah trade, I know, isn't there? And there's something I mentioned earlier about the supply chain for primates in biomedical research, which I found particularly interesting myself. For listeners in financial institutions, we've got a load of free resources on our website, the Themis website, that can help you to understand and mitigate your exposure to the illegal wildlife trade as well. So the Environmental Crimes Financial Toolkit that I mentioned earlier, this is freely available. If you just type that into Google, it should be one of the first results that comes up. It's available on the Themis website, on the WWF website, and there's a load of free resources here. There are numerous research reports. There's a resource hub with sort of practical tools and red flag indicators and case studies that you can use in your day-to-day work as well. Secondly, we would really love to hear from you. So if you've encountered suspicious activity that might be linked to environmental crime, whether that's the illegal wildlife trade or other environmental crimes, or if you've developed some innovative approaches to identifying these risks, then please do reach out to us, because your insights can help us shape future research and possibly feature in upcoming episodes as well. And then finally, if your institution is interested in participating in our research or would like to discuss training opportunities, then we are always looking for partners who take this issue seriously. So please do get in touch. So again, Ben, thank you very much for your time today. It's been incredibly informative and always such a pleasure to talk to you.
Likewise, great to speak to you, and look forward to seeing you again soon.
Next week, coinciding with the launch of WWF and Themis's new report on mining and financial crime, we'll be speaking to Melina Riso, Director of Research at the Agaripe Institute, about illegal mining in South America. You can find more information about the Environmental Crimes Financial Toolkit at wearethemis.com/UK. Thanks for listening.